Hello and welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we are going to share a story that will make you both laugh and reflect on fairness, as well as how to handle situations when you're treated unfairly at work. This story is not just about frustration and mild revenge, but also a testament to how we can find relief in challenging situations, even if it's through a small, seemingly insignificant action. In today's story, you will witness an unexpected and humorous turn of events. Instead of simply returning her uniform like most people would, the protagonist decided to turn this moment into one they would never forget. After slipping and falling into the mud, the uniform didn't just get dirty, it became a symbol of sweet revenge. While this act might be considered a gentle form of retaliation, it highlights the satisfaction the narrator felt when witnessing their boss's reaction. The surprise and shock on their boss's face as she had to hold the dirty uniform at arm's length created a moment that was both hilarious and gave the sense that fairness had been subtly carried out. Although this act of revenge wasn't anything severe, it shows how someone can handle injustice in a smart and creative way. The narrator didn't simply retaliate in a harsh manner, instead, they chose to carry out their revenge in a light-hearted, humorous way, making their boss face the discomfort she had caused. This not only brought comfort to the protagonist but also provided a lesson that sometimes, the smallest actions can bring surprising and satisfying results. If you find this story interesting and filled with lessons on how to deal with unfair treatment at work, with gentle yet effective revenge, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on other valuable lessons and stories. Continue to join us as we explore more moments of hope and strength in life. I'm a 20-year-old full-time college student, where the stressful hours of study and academic pressure are an integral part of my daily life. But beyond the hours in class, I also work over 23 hours each week to make ends meet. This isn't just a part-time job, it's the life I have to carry to support myself, knowing that I can't rely on anyone else for help. For a student like me, living paycheck to paycheck has become all too familiar. Every day, I feel like I'm racing against time, balancing studying hard to maintain my grades with working hard to earn enough money to cover basic needs like rent, food, and other living expenses. Some days, I stay up late doing homework, and the next morning, I have to wake up early to work. Sometimes, it feels like I don't have time to rest or enjoy the little things that come with student life. The old car I'm slowly paying off is also a part of my life. It's not just a vehicle that helps me commute between school and work, but also a companion that keeps me from depending on public transport. However, at times, the car also adds to the burden, as I constantly worry about whether I'll have enough money to pay off the loan and keep it running. Though the car is not a big asset, it's essential to my life, and losing it would make things much harder for me. However, there are times when everything feels cramped and insufficient to meet the basic needs of life. At times, I wonder if I can continue living this way, if I'll ever find a way out of the pressures and stresses. Those mornings waking up exhausted, those late nights working hard, I constantly ask myself if there's a way to make life a little easier. But then I realize that, no matter how tired I am, I can't stop. I have to keep pushing, not just for myself, but for my future. Before moving into the dorms, I worked at a McDonald's in my hometown, where I had been for a while. The job there was fairly stable, though not always easy, but at least I was familiar with the rhythm of work and the environment. However, when I moved into the dorms, 45 minutes away from my old job, I realized that commuting every day would be a huge burden. Not just in terms of time, but also physically exhausting. Every morning, I had to wake up early to drive to work, and after a long, hard day, I'd drive back exhausted, sometimes to the point of total fatigue. That feeling made me realize that if I kept working this job, I wouldn't be able to maintain a balance between studying and working. Deciding to change jobs wasn't easy. I thought about it for a long time, especially since my old job gave me stability and familiarity. However, I realized I couldn't keep going like this because my health and studies needed to take priority. After some time searching, I found a new opportunity at a small sandwich shop just 10 minutes away from school, a distance I could easily walk without worrying about driving or traffic. This place not only offered a convenient location but also a job with stable hours and flexible shifts. Truly, this was a stroke of luck for me. Working at this sandwich shop not only saved me commuting time but also provided me with a comfortable and satisfying job. The workdays passed quickly, and I felt like I could easily balance my studies and work. No longer weighed down by the pressure, I could focus more on my studies without worrying about being overloaded at work. The job at the sandwich shop not only helped me cover living expenses but also gave me opportunities to learn and interact with people, making me feel like I was growing every day. However, the joy I felt from switching to this new job didn't last long. After working at the sandwich shop for a while, I began to feel more comfortable and confident in my choice. Everything seemed to be stable and easy, but an unexpected change completely turned everything upside down. The old manager decided to transfer to another store, and in came a new manager. To describe her, I can only use one word: Karen, someone not only strict but also lacking understanding and empathy for her staff. Since she arrived, the work environment has completely changed. My job used to be quite easy, with reasonable processes and no significant stress. But under the new manager's leadership, everything became much more complicated. She began changing workflows without prior notice, imposing unrealistic demands, and turning simple tasks into difficult ones. She no longer cared whether employees had enough time to complete their work, but insisted everything be done rigidly, without flexibility. One of the most stressful demands was that I had to stay after hours, sometimes 2 to 3 hours, even though I had finished all the tasks she assigned. I had to stay alone, clean, organize, and check everything, while knowing the work had already been completed properly. She seemed never satisfied and always demanded more work. But what frustrated me the most was her attitude whenever I had to stay late. The next morning, she would storm into the shop, angry and scolding me. She said I had to leave before 8:30 p.m., or I wouldn't get paid for any work done after that. These words made me feel unfairly treated and extremely frustrated. I had spent extra time working to ensure everything was done right, only to be punished for it. It felt like all my efforts were unappreciated, and I became worthless in her eyes. Each passing day, I felt more and more trapped in a no-win situation. She didn't understand that asking me to stay late without paying was unjust, and I started to feel I couldn't continue working in such an environment. Furthermore, every time she got angry, I could feel the tension in my body rise, and I couldn't focus on anything other than the unreasonable demands she made. What was once a job I thought was a good opportunity had become a burden, a heavy psychological pressure I could no longer endure. The reason I had to stay late every night wasn't due to my own lack of professionalism, but because of the huge list of tasks the manager assigned. Every evening, after the shop closed, I faced an overwhelming amount of work that could not possibly be completed in such a short time. Especially without any support, I had to handle everything myself, from cleaning and checking the areas to organizing everything for the next day. These tasks required meticulous attention and time, but I was expected to stop serving by 8 p.m. and finish all of this within 30 minutes. It was an impossible request. Every night, when I saw the list of tasks she gave me, I just felt defeated and helpless. I knew I wouldn't be able to finish everything within the allotted time. Despite my best efforts and constant work to complete each task, I still couldn't make the deadline. Every time I failed to meet the deadline, it felt like a personal failure, but I knew it wasn't my fault. It was due to the excessive and unrealistic demands from the manager. It truly made me feel hopeless, unable to figure out a reasonable way to resolve these issues. The pressure kept mounting as I realized that if I didn't finish everything, I would be fired. And even if I tried my best, no one seemed to care about what I had done or how hard I had worked. It only made me feel exhausted and drained, as if all my efforts were unnoticed. What I received in return wasn't sympathy or recognition, but punishment for failing to meet impossible demands. The unfair treatment I endured from the manager didn't just disappoint me, it weighed heavily on my spirit. Every workday felt like a mental challenge, as I not only had to deal with the stress of the job but also had to endure the feeling of being treated unfairly. It felt like all my efforts were ignored and unappreciated, which gradually made me lose faith in the job and in how employees were treated in this work environment. The lack of empathy and fairness from the manager truly hit hard on my spirit and motivation. I no longer felt the job was worth it, and I started questioning my value and fairness in the eyes of others. To make matters worse, the management decided to cut my hours down to just 3 hours per week, which really shocked me. This went on for 4 weeks, and I felt like I was being exploited, working hard without fair compensation. With just $45 a week, I realized this wasn't a fair investment of my time and effort. In the end, I decided I couldn't continue anymore, because even if I kept working, I wasn't receiving the respect and fairness I deserved. One weekend, while I was with my parents off campus, I realized I had a shift that day. Although it was only a short 3-hour shift, it was the only one I had that week. It was a short but important shift for me, as this job helped me cover some of my living expenses, in addition to my academic pressure. The sandwich shop I worked at was inside a Walmart, not far from where I was staying with my family, so I decided to take advantage of the time to do some shopping before my shift started. While my mom and I were walking around the shopping area, we talked about work and the recent changes at the sandwich shop. We had a long conversation about how the management at the sandwich shop seemed to be deliberately making things difficult for me, as if they wanted me to quit without having to go through formal firing procedures. I felt like I was being pushed to a breaking point, where I had no other choice but to quit. This wasn't just a simple work decision, it was a choice that affected my life because I no longer felt I was being treated fairly. At that moment, an idea suddenly popped into my head: why continue enduring this poor treatment? The feeling of frustration and helplessness surged, and I decided it was time to quit this job, not just because of the stressful work environment, but because the attitude of the Karen boss was never going to change. I quickly grabbed my phone and sent her a message, letting her know that I was quitting immediately and wouldn't be coming in for the evening shift. Although I knew this might make her angry, I felt I had no other choice. Not long after, I received a reply from my boss, filled with a sharp reprimand. She said that I hadn't given the required 2-week notice and insisted that I would never be able to work at any other sandwich shops again. But at that moment, I no longer cared about her threats. In fact, I had no fear or regret about my decision anymore, because the struggles I had faced at this job had already drained me. During this time, I also had to face another painful decision. I had to give up my newly bought car, just 4 months after getting it, because I couldn't afford the loan and insurance anymore. It was a shiny white 2016 Hyundai Sonata that I had really loved, and having to part with it made me feel like I was losing a part of my life, a piece of the memories attached to it. But I understood that, in my current circumstances, I couldn't continue to maintain it. While messaging with my boss, I also told her that I would try to pick up the uniform she had just given me a week ago. Ironically, I had only been working at the shop for about 3.5 months, a long enough time for me to feel the unfairness and disrespect in how the shop treated its staff. However, I warned her that my class schedule ran close to closing time, so I couldn't make it earlier to return the uniform. Immediately, she responded with a cold message, and you could almost feel the sarcasm and anger in her tone, and "Oh, I need that uniform tomorrow." I tried to explain that my schedule didn't allow it and that I couldn't skip class just to bring a few items. But instead of listening, she harshly replied, "And oh, you will bring it tomorrow, don't try to lie, you were seen at the store the day you quit. There's no excuse." These words made me feel like I was being monitored and forced to comply with her unreasonable demands. But then I realized I no longer wanted to do anything more, everything had gone too far. After receiving her harsh demand, I felt a simmering frustration building inside me. I truly didn't want to argue anymore, because arguing with her only made everything more tense and pointless. I was tired of her unreasonable reasons and impossible requests. Enough was enough, no need to say anything more. I felt like I no longer had the energy or patience to deal with her. And in reality, she had created so many stressful situations at my job that I just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Even so, I couldn't deny that part of me felt a certain satisfaction knowing she would be the one to close that day. It was a fortunate coincidence, as I had already planned my timing. My classes ended at exactly 8 p.m., and I knew she would stay until everything at the shop was finished. This gave me the perfect opportunity to execute my plan without facing awkwardness when she was around. Although I couldn't avoid returning the uniform to her, at least I could do it discreetly and on time. Although I felt anger and disappointment every time I thought about her, I also knew I needed to be patient. People like her don't change easily, and if I kept reacting negatively, I would get nothing out of it but frustration. So, instead of continuing the endless argument, I decided to maintain my calm attitude, not giving her a chance to continue pushing me. I told myself that this would be the last time I had to face her, and I wouldn't let her unreasonable demands affect my decision. As the moment approached, I was ready. I didn't want to cause any more trouble, but I also didn't want to miss the opportunity to carry out what could be called sweet revenge. I knew that her having to receive the uniform back without me directly handing it to her would bother her, but that was also a way for me to regain some of the power, however small, from her hands. I happily agreed to come at the exact time she would be closing the shop, simply because I wanted her to experience some inconvenience and discomfort from the unreasonable demands she had placed on me throughout the time. I was certain about my decision, and everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. I knew I would arrive just as she was locking the door, a moment she certainly wouldn't expect. I had no more patience to face her, but I also didn't want to leave a bad impression or cause any more complications in this situation. The thought of her facing my actions gave me a little comfort, even though I knew this was just a small move in the larger picture of all the injustices I had endured. To prepare for this, I carefully placed the uniform in my reusable bag. I didn't have a disposable bag to easily throw away, but that was also part of my plan. I wanted to keep everything under my control, from the uniform to how I would return it to her. Putting the items in a reusable bag wasn't just a practical solution but also had another silent purpose. I didn't want her to be able to take my bag as her own. It was a way to ensure that I wouldn't be exploited again, that everything I did was calculated, and there was no room for mockery or unreasonable demands. As I walked into the shop, preparing to return the uniform to her, I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction. I had imagined in great detail the scene of her having to take these items out of the shop, looking uncomfortable and embarrassed. The image of her stumbling while carrying these items, each step heavy as if she were responsible for all the unreasonable actions she had caused, really made me feel a sense of pleasure. The inconvenience I created, even if it was just a small detail in the chain of events, was enough for me to feel some satisfaction. She would have to take that uniform out, not just as a physical act, but as a reminder of the power I had regained from her. I knew she wouldn't be happy to do this, and imagining that scene made me feel a bit of joy inside. The feeling of power, even if small, was something I had lacked throughout my time at this job. By creating a situation where she had to go through discomfort and awkwardness, I could feel that some justice had been served. But above all, I realized that my actions weren't just about returning items or making her uncomfortable. It was my way of reclaiming some self-respect, showing her that although I could leave, I would no longer tolerate being disrespected. This act wasn't a crude or unreasonable response, it was a subtle way of showing that I had learned to stand up for myself, even in situations that seemed trivial. When the time came, I knew this was the moment I had been planning for. I had carefully prepared everything, and the feeling that everything was falling into place made me more confident than ever. I arrived exactly at 8:30, the time I had calculated carefully, and saw her leaving the store. Although she didn't have the uniform in the reusable bag right away, I couldn't help but feel some satisfaction as everything seemed to be going according to the script I had imagined. But something unexpected happened, a sweet irony, which made me feel an extra sense of satisfaction. It started to rain, and the rain wasn't just light, it was heavy, as if the clouds were reflecting the tension and injustice I had endured over time. The sidewalk became slippery, mud splashing everywhere. And, as if it were an essential part of the story, I unexpectedly slipped and fell into the mud. While I couldn't contain myself, fortunately, I wasn't seriously injured, mostly thanks to the uniform I was carrying. I felt a relief that the uniform, although dirty, had saved me from a worse fall. Those items weren't just the end of a job chapter but also a symbol of a small but significant battle in my eyes. When I stood up, I realized the uniform was no longer in perfect condition, but it had become a gift full of meaning. And when I handed that dirty uniform to her, I couldn't help but notice the change in her expression. Her reaction was truly unforgettable. She stamped her foot and made a face of disgust as she kept the uniform at least 10 feet away from her. Her gestures clearly showed hatred and total surprise, as if she couldn't believe I'd do such a thing. She didn't say a word, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she couldn't find any words to respond to my actions. This silence, along with her heavy steps and gasps, was the sweet revenge I had been hoping for. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, not because I had made her uncomfortable, but because I had achieved my goal, not through rudeness but with calculated precision and patience. Yes, I had to buy a new uniform and change in a Walmart bathroom, but that was a small price to pay to enjoy this sweet feeling. That was the punishment she didn't expect, and it made all the hardships and injustices I'd faced worth it. I know this wasn't a great or monumental act, but in my eyes, it was a small yet incredibly important victory. I had regained my self-respect, and more than that, I had made her realize that you can't oppress or abuse power without consequences. Moments like this, no matter how small, can give us the feeling that we've won a major battle. That night, when I returned to the dorm, I felt a sense of relief and peace. Even though it was a small act, I felt like I had finally done something I had wanted for a long time after being treated unjustly at work. I sat down and took out my phone. My fingers slid across the screen, typing a short but meaningful message to her. The words were simple but not lacking in sarcasm. Enjoy, smiley face. Although it was just a brief message, I could clearly feel that this was my way of closing a tense and frustrating chapter in my life. The feeling when I hit send was truly relieving, as if all my grievances and frustrations had been released. But that wasn't all. I didn't just want her to receive that message, I wanted to ensure she couldn't contact me again. That's why I decided to block her number. I didn't want any further communication with the person who had tormented me all this time. This wasn't about hatred, but about protecting my space and peace, so I wouldn't be bothered by more negativity. And then, right after, I felt something spread within me. It was serenity, a freedom I had never experienced before. I knew that, although this wasn't a big battle, it was a victory for me. I no longer had to endure mistreatment or feel oppressed. I had risen up on my own, found a way to close this chapter of my life in a deserving way. With that enjoy, smiley face, I wasn't just sending a small message, but a statement of my strength. And I believe that, deep down, karma truly came to me, though not immediately, but I was sure that the price would come for her. Satisfaction doesn't come from hurting others, but from standing firm through challenges, maintaining self-respect, and returning what happened with intelligence and resilience. This wasn't just revenge, it was my way of taking control of my life. And in that moment, I realized that nothing is more precious than holding on to who you are, sticking to your principles, and not letting anyone break them. Karma did indeed come, not in the way I expected, but in the way I had created it through my own actions. The story is a powerful reminder of the strength of sticking to one's principles and self-respect in difficult situations. The protagonist, though enduring injustice and abuse of power from his boss, didn't allow himself to fall into a hopeless state. Instead of reacting with violence or hatred, he chose to act wisely, preserving his space to resolve things on his terms. The ending also shows a maturity in how one views revenge and karma, not as making the other person suffer but finding justice for oneself without further harm. The lesson here is, sometimes, the strongest way to face injustice is not to get caught up in power games or be affected by negativity. Instead, find a way to resolve the issue intelligently, stand firm, and protect yourself with patience and self-respect. Karma will find those who deserve it, and in many cases, our right actions will be the sweetest revenge. My advice to you from this story is, even after overcoming a tough challenge and reclaiming fairness, don't forget that every decision you make will affect your journey ahead. Don't let negative past experiences make you lose faith in kindness and fairness in life. Continue to protect yourself with resilience, but also remember to let go of negative emotions and focus on the positive ahead. Although revenge may bring temporary satisfaction, lasting peace comes from forgiveness, growth, and not letting negativity control your life. Keep pursuing your passions and goals with a clear mind and an open heart.